And we are live. Welcome everybody to Royal Fish Aquatics. Let's see who we have in here now. Vinny, how you doing, Vinny? We got Lori, Logan Aquatics. Thanks everybody for coming out. PB Aquatics. We got Chief. So like always, I appreciate you guys for showing up to my live stream, giving me an hour of your time. And today we're gonna be talking about the history of fish keeping, like how far it goes back and who were some of the pioneers in the industry in the research that I did and everything. But we're gonna get to that in just a minute. Who else we got? I'm gonna let the notification to go out before I actually get into the topic. So I hope everybody's having a good week. Logan Aquatic, you're you're in yeah, I'm in Florida, Logan. I'm in Southern Florida. So where you at, Logan? Guys, don't forget, hit that thumbs up and real quick, couple plugins. You guys know I got my group on Facebook. So if you're on Facebook, look us up, Fish Tubers United. And it's just a platform out there just to help your channel grow and to get the watch hours and stuff like that. So we just watch each other's videos and promote our videos there. And two, we have, just regular people that just enjoy YouTube and enjoy fish tubers and watch our channel. And on Instagram, I'm always posting new things on Instagram too, and on my Facebook page. I too have a Facebook page. You're in Southwest Florida, Port Charlotte. Okay, well, I appreciate that. I know where Port Charlotte's at. We got Big Tank Hank in the house. How you doing? So today's topic, yeah, PB's in West Palm. Today we're going to talk about the history of fish keeping. And Lady J, how you doing tonight? And I decided to do this because there's not really a lot information out there, and I really was doing my research and trying to fact check as much as I could and everything. So I kind of like wrote down key points and interesting things that happened throughout the years that have changed our hobby and created our hobby and everything from the beginning of time. So I'm gonna start off pretty much. It was the first information out there of fish keeping was in 2500 BC. And fish keeping evidence showed that the Sumerians and the Babylonians were keeping fish for food. The Egyptians too adapted this, and the Romans too, and a lot of different cultures. I mean, the Philippines, West Indies, Asia. Um, a lot of people adopted this method of catching fish and trying to keep them alive for just a few days to be able to have fresh fish to eat and everything. The Romans actually kept lampreys and other saltwater fish in their saltwater pools. And the water pools that they were using back in the days were these square structures that they build close to the water. So when high tide comes, it gets full. And they, kind of push fish in there. And then they close the doors and they capture fish that way, and they start moving it inland little by little. And they learn how to move the fish, a little bit closer to inland and everything, but try to keep them alive. And everywhere they moved the fish to, they had these outside ponds where they kept their fish at for them to be able to then slaughter the fish and be able to eat it. So that was the first form of people keeping fish in history, was mainly keeping fish just for the consumption. And it was not until about 900 AD, the Chinese started breeding themselves selectively during the Sung Dynasty. Evidence showed that these fish were kept for purely decorative purpose, like garden ponds. People were often forbidden to eat these fish. So the first fish that actually was being bred, and this that I found documentation about, and was able to check it was that the Chinese in the 900, the Shang Dynasty, was pretty much starting to breed the first type of carp, and that was the first forms of them trying to create a fish for the hobby. So it was pretty it's pretty interesting because now this fish was not allowed to be eaten anymore. They could not eat carp. They'll eat every other type of fish, but carp was completely forbidden to be eaten. Then in time they got more selective with it because they started seeing markings on the fish. All of a sudden, through generations of being bred in captivity, more colors start showing out in them. So in about the 1500, the Chinese started searching for the most prettiest looking species of these carps, and they wanted mainly the Gabelle carp with the gold coloration. And the reason they wanted the gold coloration was because the emperor color was gold, and they thought the color gold was holy, and it was deep into their religion and their beliefs over there in the Shang Dynasty about the color gold. So the color gold was only for the royal family. Um, any other colors could be kept, but it was mainly kept by the wealthy. Now, then after a while, it was about mid 1500s, the goldfish started showing all over Asia, the Middle East, and it was mainly the Middle East and Asia where they were keeping fish, except Japan. It didn't get to Japan until 1616. And the reason I made that a key point was because when the carp or the goldfish starts making it over there to Japan, they really started more experimenting with the way they bred their fish. And a lot of those species of Ryukins and red caps and all the real fancy short body goldfish with the big tails and everything, those lines were actually created, around that time because that's when Japan started getting their hands on them. And there's actually talk a lot about the Shibunkin because ornamental goldfish made it all the way to Europe and everything too until about 1690. And when it made it to Europe, it started getting to those Japanese fish and everything. Don't forget, the map looked completely different. Yes, the koi fish are related to the carp. Actually, the koi fish is a type of carp and everything. Just like the goldfish is another type of carp. They all fall under the carp family and everything. And so those were different types of carps that actually came from China that created most of your kois and most of your goldfish. But then people start selectively breeding, and Japan got their hands in 1616. And then by 1690, it really showed up all over Europe and everything. Now they were keeping fish too in bowls inside with plants, and they were keeping them with fountains and everything. So they actually didn't understand what they were doing was correct at this time, but they were actually keeping fish indoor, and the carpet. The carp is a very hardy fish, doesn't need that much aeration, but being in the fountains and being with plants, their water qualities were real great. So that's what they were able to keep them indoor for a long time. And it's a type of fish that does well in the bowl because a lot of people always had them in bowls and everything back in the days, or ceramic fixtures and everything. Now, between 1690 and 1805, it was, Europe and everything, and goldfish was the main fish people were keeping and everything, in indoors and outdoors and everything. And then you start seeing people they were in the hobby later in time starting to catch their own fish in their own regions, and we're going to start getting into that now because that's where you see a lot more of the species that we keep, even though goldfish and koi are in the hobby. But remember, those guys, their bloodline goes way back. You know, they go way back in time. I would say probably the first fish bred. That's the way I look at it. They were the first fish that were selectively bred in the hobby and started being distributed between countries, and that's what kind of got the hobby going. But there was no such keeping the way that we keep fish in tanks still. Now, in 1805, before then, a fish keeping was only done outdoors. They didn't understand about keeping fish indoors. Um, they could keep the goldfish and the carp, you know, in fountains and in bowls and stuff like that, but they didn't understand how to keep other fish like that because that was the only form they were doing. So, a key person in the hobby was Robert Warrington. He's credited with studying the tank's requirements of keeping fish alive for longer, and he created the tank cycle. He was the first person to actually document and write down how to do a tank cycle. And you being in this hobby, you know what we mean. You got to prepare your tank before you put fish in it, or they will die in days. And that's what was happening in the hobby. They go capture fish from the wild, and they were bringing them indoors in the region, and the fish will die in them. And they didn't understand why we can't keep no other fish. Mainly, we keep goldfish and carp, but why we can't keep, you know, these guppies that we found, these angelfish, you know, everything that they were that they found in the region. All right, let's see who we got. Logan's, hey PB, Vinny, hi everyone. I'm still 30 feet in the air in New York, but I'll be lurking. All right, you be safe out there. Now, like I said, only the Chinese actually were the ones be able to bring goldfish in. They created those bloodlines where they could have them indoor in the bowls and everything. And then in 1810 in Europe was when the glass tank was invented during the Victorian era. Now, 1810, I just found information that that's when they were having tanks, and they have pictures of them and everything. And the Victorian era tanks, guys, that I looked up and saw were amazing. If you know anything about the Victorian era, it was a very flashy, you know, the upper class were real flashy with their stuff, and these cast iron stands that they had, the ornate on them and the decorations and the way they were made were amazing. And I mean, these tanks were nice. And in this time, tanks had actually metal frames, and they try to seal them with these metal frames. They did not have bonding that we have right now. The way that we bond our glass and everything, that hasn't even been created yet. So they were using those nice, like fancy type of tanks and everything to keep fish, and they weren't really keeping lids on them. A lot had plants that were sticking out of them and everything, and that's the way they were trying to keep fish indoors. And then don't forget, 5 years ago they just invented how to cycle a tank. So it took 5 years for them to go from cycling to learn how to cycle a tank. This is how we do it, to start coming up with these nice tanks. You know, everybody keeps these basic tanks that we have and everything, but in those days, most people could only afford to have one or two tanks, and it was a big display in their house, and it was a sign of royalty. It was a sign of money. It was a sign of, you know, I am smarter than you, not to keep these fish alive indoors and everything. And that's what really kicked off people then now gonna start experimenting with fish. Now we could keep them alive. We're gonna see how far the hobby has taken it from being able to learn how to keep fish alive in 1810, and in 210 years now we're filming ourselves keeping tanks on the internet. You know what I mean? Like, to me, that was very interesting. Two, when I was doing my research, there's only two known Victorian tanks still around. There are 100% Victorian, you know, era tanks. And from what I was reading, one is a freshwater tank from a private owner. They got it completely restored and everything. And he keeps freshwater fish on there. And then there's a museum in Europe that has one with salt water, but they actually customize a pump system for their saltwater tanks and for that Victorian saltwater tank. So they're the only two known real documented Victorian tanks still in existence, because glass breaks and then it's not a true tank really anymore. Now, another thing that in this time people were knowing about other fish and everything, and I thought that was interesting that the way they knew about fish was because before they started really keeping fish indoors and everything alive the way they're doing in 1810, or when they started in 1810, they knew about fish from other regions, but they were dead specimens in jars. They kept them in like mason jars as dead specimens. And different houses and different places out there, they had these different buildings. You could go and look at these specimens of different fish and everything from all over the world, but they were all dead and everything. So now 1810 comes around, they start learning how to keep fish in glass containers, and they get real fancy with it and everything. And then we jump to 1850. Now, in 1853, the opening of the public aquarium London, it was called London Zoological Garden at the Regent Park. That was one of few public aquariums that opened up. That was a big thing that happened in 1850. A lot of major cities were opening up these big aquariums, big SeaWorlds everywhere. And pretty much these places didn't care about keeping the fish on. I don't say they didn't care, but they really didn't have the knowledge of keeping fish alive, especially in that type of environment. And they just were more about replacing the fish. Fish dies, I get another one. And I mean, they were just showing fishes from all over around the world and everything. It's these big aquariums all over Europe. It was the biggest trend that was happening in the early 1850s. And then another key person in that era is Emil Robnaber. He's a German. He wrote an essay called "The Sea in a Glass," introducing fish keeping as a hobby to the public. Tropical fish require heating, and they use a flame underneath their tanks. They actually use gas flames underneath their tanks to keep their tanks warm. So they remember they started keeping fish, but they didn't have no way of keeping them now tropical fish alive over there in Europe. It gets cold. They didn't have insulation the way that we have now in our house, and it still gets cold inside of our houses if you live in an environment where you get cold winters. And tropical fish will die because you need to keep that water hot, or you need to keep that fish room or wherever you keep your fish to a certain temperature. But back in those days, they didn't have that. But what they did is these gas lamps, and the bottom tank was actually a slate. So you had four pieces of glass, and the bottom was a piece of slate. That's mainly how their tanks were made. And they had underneath it, they kept the gas lamp there on at night and everything, or during the day, whatever, and keeping the fish going alive, because that's the first way that they learn how to keep fish warm. Now, keeping tropical fish all over Europe, and I'm talking about the world has opened now. Travel has happened. So they have starting to grab species from different areas and everything. And now fish keepers are actually trying to keep fish alive in different regions just to show off. Oh, I got these African cichlids. I got these, South American cichlids. I got these live bears, these wild live bears. And it was a way of just showing, okay, I got tons of fish. And in that time too, so now they're bringing fish from all over the world. And the first person that is documented actually breeding tropical fish in Europe was Pierre Carbonnier. He's actually the first person in Europe to breed them, and it was the paradise fish and the beta. So this guy actually was able to the first person to bring fish from another area into his environment, keep in the tank, and breed it. And he's actually was the founder of the Paris Public Aquaria because, like I told you, in the 1850s, it was the big trend of everybody having big cities having aquariums. So Paris had one, London had one. I mean, they were popping up everywhere. And Pierre in 1875 became awarded the gold medal of Imperial French Acclimatization Society for the research of breeding exotic fish. So this guy was real deep in the hobby. If you look at it like a forefather, he's probably on the Grant Rushmore of fish keeping, you know. So you guys got any questions? I am paying attention to the chat and everything. I'll definitely answer your questions. I know I'm just here just rambling, but I still appreciate you guys actually coming and listen to me ramble about the history of fish keeping. I mean, I think this is pretty interesting knowing knowing the history of the hobby that we do, you know, and who actually started doing this stuff and how it's changed so much. You know, now we're gonna get to the late 1850, almost the 1900. There was like tons of studies now being done about fish keeping. You know, a lot of these scientists held different titles. You know, some of them were, some people back in those days had different degrees in different studies, and they studied all different types of animals. And when fish keeping became a trend, you know, they all jumped on it, and they're doing all these studies. This is how we start finding out more about breeding all different types of fish. So this is where the fish community now gets together and starts doing what they have to do to keep these fish alive, to breed these fish in captivity, and start creating our own strands and our own colors. You know, a lot of these fish came from the wild. When you look at a wild guppy compared to a fancy guppy, it's amazing how they, created that. You know, people selectively kept breeding and breeding to create that. Now we're gonna jump into the era that we're in. I call it now the modern aquarium because now about when the 1900 kicks in, that's only 120 years ago, really. That's where everything was really being created for what the hobby is now, and jumping now it's not going to be only the wealthy people having fish. Is going to be able to get into the hands of the common people. This is where the whole hobby now really takes a different toll, I think, because now this is where we get more fancier with our fish. You know, we get more into where we're at, all the way to where we're at now. So there was a lady called Jean Velapou Palel that she started writing about the modern aquarium. So she was mainly just a writer, but the main person given the title, the person that started the modern aquarium, is Philip Goss. So that's in my research, and that's the way I believe, and I look at Philip Goss as the creator of the modern aquarium. He was the first person to, completely do all the studies about keeping fish and doing pretty much everything we do now in the modern aquarium, from keeping snails in there, feeding live food. I mean, all the studies done were right there with him. And another thing that always helped, and helped in anything that has to do with anything of animal creation was Darwin studies were actually done around the same time. So that's kind of a key point I want to just put. Philip Goss was right there in the same time Darwin was creating, his theories and his Darwin theories and stuff. So then now we jump to 1920. Until, until then, most fish kept in tanks were captured in the wild and bred by hobbyists, except for high developed goldfish and carp mainly kept in Asia. So still, even though now they're keeping fish and everything, and yes, species have moved hands between different scientists. Because I bet, a scientist from London meets another scientist from, China, and they're both into fish keeping. I guarantee they exchange fish. You know what I mean? It's like if any of us meet each other, we get into anybody's fish room some way, somehow, we're gonna end up with a bag of fish leaving in our hands because we're gonna buy it from them. They're gonna give it to us, or it's just you're gonna sit there, you're gonna start talking, and you're gonna see his fish, and you're gonna see something you haven't had, but it looks nice. You want to try to keep, and you end up getting it. So that's mainly how the exchange of fish happened. Now, the key thing was because in 1920 in Florida, group of entrepreneurs began the first commercial fish breeding business. So it wasn't until 1920 where an official documented business about fish farming was created. And there was several farmers in Florida created this group of farmers, and all they were doing was farming fish and trying to move it throughout the whole United States. And the way they were doing this in 1920 was mainly with steamships and the railway. And that's what helped, a lot of things in this country and a lot of countries was the beginning of transportation, you know, easier transportation, not just jumping on a boat going from one country waterway and waterway, jumping on horse and moving. Easier transportation of shipments, and trains and steamboats were the key points in transportation. And it helped our hobby. It helped now these farmers in Florida be able to move their fish all over the U.S. into the hands of all these stores because the hobby now has really been taken off. Now the common people are out there buying fish. There's fish stores popping up everywhere, and actually, there's actually a store in Florida. There's actually a store in Florida that's about 45 years old too. Just want to let you guys know that. Google it, find out, make your way there. So the cool thing was 1920. Now they got a commercial. They shipping it everywhere. But the importing of fish was a lot harder because these boats took longer to come and everything. So people were only able to create a farm, breed fish, and able to ship as far as their railways be able to take fish or their steamboats. They're not able to go across countries. They weren't able to go from America to Europe, Asia to America, and so it was only the stuff that you was able to breed in your country and be able to send out. But 1950, now after World War II, after the war, the pilots actually helped the hobby because breeders began to use ex-combat pilots to transport their fish around the world. And now it made it easier for the now I won't say poor, but the common people now to keep these fish, and it just blew up. Now I'm able to go get fish from Africa, bring them over here, put them in my farm, breed them, sell them. Now you got people doing importing, transshipping. All that began in 1950. So 70 years ago was a key point that I wanted to point because now that's where our hobby has taken it. And I looked at it as a way that it was pretty cool to look at the hobby and to look at the history of what we're doing and who was these certain people that actually created this hobby that we're so deep into. I mean, when you look at it, look how big really it is. People, we sit here and we watch us talk about the fish. We watch each other messing with our tanks, breeding projects that we do, new fish that we got, unboxings. I mean, that in 70 years, because something else like the internet then kicked in and social media kicked in. Now we have grown more. You know, I think the hobby is not gonna die. It's just gonna keep growing because history has shown that. Um, it is not a dying hobby. This is something that has completely changed. I mean, I wonder what these people back in these days would think if they see some of the fish that we're creating now. You know, hybrid fish. They probably would never have imagined, in this time when they created the hobby and were so deep in into how to figure out how to keep them alive. They were gone to now crossbreeding two complete different species and creating a whole nother species, and then be able to keep reproducing that species and keeping it alive in the tank. You know, it's gone. I mean, it's been in history for so long. So, guys, I'm actually it's not gonna be a whole hour. Just about I need about quick 30 minutes and everything about the history of fish keeping. I'm gonna cut it short. Again, I appreciate you guys for watching. I appreciate you guys for actually listening to me ramble about my research on fish keeping and how it was created. And you guys have a blessed night. Thank you again.